Hello, everyone, and welcome to an HBCU Sports exclusive interview. It is March, which means it is tournament time in basketball. And one of the premier matchups we are looking forward to is on the women's bracket that will see the 14 seed Jackson State Tigers go up against the juggernaut 3 seed UConn Huskies. And here with me is a special guest who will be helping us provide some context on the matchup between Jackson State and UConn. She is a writer for the Hartford Courant, Emily Adams. Emily, thank you so much for taking some time to preview this matchup with me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm excited for it. I think it'll be a good one.
So let's get down to it. UConn is coming off a season in which they won the Big East title for the fourth year in a row, all 4 years since they have been back in the Big East. They're going to be a bit shorthanded this year. One player that they will have this year that they didn't have last year is Paige Beckers when they finished in the Sweet 16, which is kind of a down year, which is hilarious to say that finishing in the Sweet 16 is a down year, something they hadn't done in nearly 20 years at that point. So just talk about a bit of what we need to know about UConn coming into this game that people may not know, and how the numbers may affect them heading into this year's tournament and potentially this matchup against Jackson State.
Yeah, the injuries have kind of been the storyline for them for really the last 2 or 3 years now, unfortunately. It's been a real plague. They just, right before the Big East tournament, lost Amari DeBerry, who's just a reserve forward off the bench, but she had a concussion. So they're down now to 8 players for the whole tournament. Aaliyah Edwards, who's their All-American forward, mostly playing center right now. But she is just coming off of a broken nose at the Big East tournament. She missed 2 games there. And even with all of that, I think they're still a little bit underrated as a 3 seed, frankly. I mean, I think the 3 line was the right one for them, but I think they're a really serious threat to come out of that Portland 3 regional. I think you can never count out Paige Beckers. The Big East tournament showed us that she was, I mean, just really in her peak form that weekend. She turns on a different gear when it's the postseason, and we started to see a little bit of that in conference play. And yeah, I mean, Edwards is having the best year of her career. Their freshmen, KK Arnold and Ashlyn Shade, have been starting. I think they've got about 20 starts under them now, and they've been phenomenal for first-year players. And yeah, I mean, this team's losses are all to ranked teams currently. Most of them are to teams that are in the top 10, I believe. So, their record doesn't look great this year, but I think they very much are as good as ever. I think they're definitely better than the team we saw last year.
Absolutely. So just to provide a little bit of context for those who may not know, even though this is HBCU sports, some may not know about the Jackson State women's team. So Jackson State women's team for the second year in a row, well, not the second year in a row, for the second time in 3 years, finished undefeated in SWAC play. They were 18-0, finished with a 26-6 overall record. For those who may remember last year, they were upset in the SWAC tournament by Southern, who went on to win the SWAC tournament and get the automatic bid for the NCAA tournament. This time, Jackson State was not playing around. They finished the SWAC tournament with the win over Alcorn State. They beat them 68-44, pretty much ran through their last 2 tournament opponents, one of which was Arkansas Pine Bluff, which had an all-SWAC guard, Zay Green, on the roster. This is a team that, lost a key player to a ACL injury, Daphne White, to a serious injury, but Maya Crump, all SWAC, Adriana Avent, all SWAC. Emily, just talk about what have you heard about Jackson State this season, if anything? One thing that this team put themselves on the map a couple of years ago for a pretty impressive performance against LSU in the opening round, fell short in that one, but pretty much put their name on the map. And Coach Tamika Reed has been receiving a lot of praise for her job of coaching up this team and coaching them to be the juggernaut that they are now. What have you heard about this team, and what troubles could they provide for UConn in this game?
Yeah, I was actually super sad when this was UConn's draw for this game because I've been a huge Jackson State fan all year. Actually, I've followed them fairly closely here and there as much as possible. I'm an AP voter. I had them in my top 25 for a while. I've been so impressed with them and what they've been able to do. I mean, I think, you look at their record, you look at them going undefeated in the SWAC, and I think it's easy to write that off. But I think they had one of, if not the hardest non-conference schedule of anyone in the country. I mean, you look at that slate that they played through the late fall, and it's just, I mean, Coach Reed really put them through the ringer, and they really rose to it. Like, they didn't get blown out in a lot of those games. They were really competitive in some of them. So this is a team that I like a lot as sort of a sneaky upset threat. I don't know if they have just the raw talent to hang with UConn. I think, I mean, that's always been UConn's calling card, is that their rosters are just stacked. They're bringing former All-Americans off the bench. And so I think it's hard for any like mid-major team to compete with that. I think that's why we saw them run the table so easily in the Big East. But yeah, I love Jackson State. I think if they got a better seed line in this, which I personally think they should have, I think if they had a lighter matchup in this first round, they would be a really big threat to make it through.
Yeah, and you talk about Jackson State, potentially being a team that can make that AP top 25. They actually received a vote for the AP top 25 for the first time in school history. At that point they were on this big winning streak, and they ended the regular season on an 18-game winning streak. So that came along with them receiving that AP top 25 vote. But I think one thing that you said about, Tamika Reed stacking the deck against them, they played 3 straight games against Mississippi State, Oregon State, and Kansas State, all teams that have finished with 20+ wins. And I believe all of them are in the NCAA tournament, if I'm not mistaken. So it has been, Tamika Reed trying to prep this team to take that next step into not just being the best HBCU team, but actually being competitive for an NCAA championship. So what are some things that you have seen from UConn this season that if you see it in this game against Jackson State, it could potentially maybe not, lead to an upset, or maybe it could lead to an upset, but it could be something that could, stall the process into moving on to the round of 32?
Yeah, I think the biggest things for UConn have consistently been the 3-point shooting is a big one. If they're hitting early, it's probably going to be over pretty quickly. Unfortunately, when Paige Beckers starts making threes, it's hard to keep up. But she's been a little bit inconsistent from 3 before the Big East tournament at the end of the regular season. She was having some issues that kind of went away during the Big East tournament, but something to keep an eye on. They just haven't been super consistent from range. They don't have, one shooter who's hitting, 45, 50% every single night. But they have a lot of threats. So I think that is what kind of creates a challenge for a lot of teams, is that everybody can shoot the 3 if they have to. And I think the other thing is just going to be, keeping a cap defensively for Jackson State on that pick and roll between Paige and Aaliyah. Getting Edwards back is really big for them. They don't have pretty much any other forwards. They have one other on the roster who is usually their first off the bench. But Edwards and Beckers have been pretty unstoppable in that pick and roll. It makes their offense really productive, really high speed, lots of ball movement. So they're really hard to slow down offensively. That's been a hallmark of Gino's whole career. So I think it's going to be a defense-heavy game for Jackson State if they want to stay in this.
And you talk about a defense-heavy game. One thing that Jackson State has done better than most teams a lot of teams in the country is rebounding. They ranked 9th in the country in total rebounds, and I believe we're top 15 in offensive rebounds. So, and they're 15th in block shots. So taking it inside is going to be a tough task potentially for UConn if they want to win this game. But I want to go back real quick on the Jackson State non-conference schedule. Can teams can these mid-major teams learn from those games, even though most of them are losses? Jackson State did beat a St. John's team that, although they finished with a losing record, that is a win against the Big East opponent. So that is nothing to take lightly. But they lost by, I believe, 40 to Kansas State. They lost by 20 to Oregon State. They gave Mississippi State a pretty good game. They only lost by 10 in that one. But can you learn anything? What if anything can you learn from those games help that can potentially help Jackson State going into this game against UConn and potentially in their bid for an upset?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, Jackson State's in sort of a similar but sort of lesser position than UConn, and that, UConn playing out of the Big East really had to load up their non-conference this year as well. All of their losses came in non-conference play. They played 2 top 20 teams during conference play. So, I think it's huge. I think it's a really, really big deal for tournament prep. It's something that Gino has talked about a lot over the years, is trying to schedule some of those best teams in the country so that they're a little more familiar when you get to March. I think that makes a big difference. I think even just playing against All-Americans, like playing against players who are just straight up more talented than you. I think nothing really prepares you for that other than doing it. And I think nothing gets you over the nerves of, going up against a Paige Beckers, going up against an Aaliyah Edwards with that national name and brand and recognition, like doing it. And I think the more times you've been in those situations, the more times that you've sort of had to navigate these games where you're outmatched, I think the better chance you have of winning one later on and learning, what your team does best in those situations.
Right. So we talked about it a little bit about the matchup we're looking forward to in this game. The Paige Beckers against the Paige Beckers and Aaliyah Edwards against Jackson State backcourt, which will consist of Adriana Avent and Talon Bowler. So, and you look at the size comparison, it's pretty evenly matched. The Paige is 5'11", Talon Bowler 6'1". Adriana Avent, 5'11". I believe Aaliyah Edwards is about 6'3", so she's a bit taller than the other players for Jackson State. So what effect do you think the size of the Jackson State backcourt do you think will have on UConn in this game? Could that be something that works to their advantage in this one?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, UConn has definitely struggled against teams with size this year. We saw, when you look at like a South Carolina, they had a really hard time against them, had a hard time against UCLA, who's got Lauren Betts, had a hard time against Texas. So that was more the guards causing them some grief. But yeah, I mean, I think having Aaliyah back makes a big difference. And Ice Brady, who's their other forward off the bench, she's a redshirt freshman. And she really had a breakout in the Big East tournament too, kind of didn't have a choice. She played 80 minutes across the semifinal and championship since Edwards was out. And she truly was the only active forward on the roster at that point. But she looked awesome. And if they can bring her along a little bit more, if they can play that big lineup with the 2 6'3" girls on the floor, I think that negates a lot of their problems with the size. And yeah, I mean, I think with Paige, especially, Paige's athleticism makes up for size in a lot of ways. I mean, she's leading the team in blocks. She's number 2 in steals. She's just kind of one of those players that can do everything. She plays a lot bigger than she is. She can post up, I think with a player like that, it's harder, I think, to take advantage of something like size, especially when it's not a huge margin, when you don't have a 6'5" or 6'6" girl that can kind of really take over in the paint.
Okay, so now let's transition a bit to UConn's bigs, because you talked about, Paige Becker's struggles from 3-point range. But one thing about this Jackson State team is they're not much of a 3-point shooting team at all. Don't take much in games. So they're a team that likes to get downhill. And UConn is a team that, while the numbers may not, represent, their size down low, or, being a team that ranked outside of the top 50 in block shots, I still wouldn't want to go inside on them because I know that Gino Oriyama is coaching them up and letting them know that this is a team that likes to get down into the paint. Talk to me about the game plan for Jackson State's offensive attack, trying to get down into the paint and get the best possible shot.
Yeah, I think, frankly, one of the best things they can do early is try to create foul trouble for UConn. That has really, really put them in bad spots a few times this year, both with the guards and with the post players, but especially like Brady, who's the redshirt freshman, is a little bit prone to foul trouble. And without the depth on the bench, they really don't have room for players to be picking up, 2-3 early fouls. So yeah, I think for Jackson State, that's a huge key. If they can get, especially Edwards and Brady, into foul trouble early, it's going to put UConn in a really, really bad spot. And yeah, I mean, I think the other thing for them is just, Edwards has gotten a lot better this year, I think, at dealing with physicality. I think this has been by far the best season that she's had defensively, and rebounding as well. But they're not a very good rebounding team. And you said Jackson State that's kind of been their calling card, and UConn really has not made that sort of part of their identity in the same way. So yeah, if they can complete on those second chance points and get those offensive boards productive still, that's going to open up a lot of opportunities for them, because UConn doesn't take advantage of that particularly well.
Yeah, and having a short lineup, as much as we talk about the experience of UConn and having Gino Oriyama, we don't need to go down his whole resume. We know who he is, arguably the greatest college coach ever, but when you have a short lineup, you have a very short lease. And as you said, if you can get them into foul trouble, you force matchups and lineup changes that they probably haven't even seen all year, So just talk about the chemistry that could potentially, that UConn is probably going to have to face, the problems that they could potentially go through, and they probably haven't practiced with certain lineups that they are going to have to play in this game. Talk about the impact that could potentially have on the outcome.
Yeah, I think the nice thing for them this year, I mean, nice is heavily air quoted, but last year when they were dealing with the injury issues, a lot of them were these sort of short-term, like sprained ankle, broken wrist, broken finger, might be available, might not. This year they've all been pretty major season-ending things. So as much as that's sort of, destabilized things, I think it's also given them some consistency and some time to really figure out what works in their rotations and what matchups they like where and what lineups they like where. And I feel like that did sort of come together during the Big East tournament. Again, missing Edwards kind of, messed up a lot of those rotations and made them look a lot different than they usually have. But, they've stuck with the same 7-man rotation since probably about early January when Aubrey Griffin tore her ACL and was ruled out for the year. So, they're looking comfortable, I think, in the rotation that they're in right now. I think Gino has a good sense of what he has. But yeah, I mean, again, if they, if Edwards and or Brady end up in foul trouble, they don't have subs for those guys anymore. They are each other's only reserve. So, I think the bigger thing is going to be less the chemistry and more just tiring players out. I mean, Brady having to play 40 minutes in, back-to-back games in the Big East tournament is not something that's going to be sustainable, at this level when you're playing this kind of competition day after day after day and traveling the way that they're going to have to if they end up out in Portland for the Sweet 16. So, yeah, I think that's the bigger concern for me, is the fatigue more so than the actual on-court dynamic.
So let's talk about breakout player candidates, with having short lineups in the NCAA tournament, people are going to have to step up. Who is that player for UConn that you believe has the chance to have a breakout game in this one that could potentially lift UConn over the hump?
Yeah, to me, the X factor is going to be KK Arnold. She is a freshman starter, has been starting since AZ Fudd got hurt early in the year. And she's just really, come into her own. I think, she had one really, really good game and one kind of down game in the Big East tournament, but she's just one of those kids who does a little bit of everything for them. Like I said earlier, she leads them in steals, averaging like 10 points a game, fair amount of, she has 3, 4, 5 rebounds a game, 3, 4, 5 assists. They run that 3-point guard set with Paige and KK and Nika Mule. So she's a player where, she creates a lot of transition opportunities. She's really, really fast paced. And so, if she can start getting going on the fast break, if she's getting steals, if she's able to disrupt an offense the way that, she was able to a lot during the Big East tournament, I think it makes it really, really difficult for teams. I mean, truly just to score enough points to keep up with UConn. And she's also one that can be a sneaky hitter from 3 on a good night. So if she can connect and she's making the impact that she's capable of on the defensive end, she really is a game changer for them.
Yeah, and just to provide a breakout player for Jackson State, I feel like Haley Breland for Jackson State, who is a sophomore guard, I believe she could potentially have an impact in this game. She had a pretty good SWAC championship performance, hit three threes in that game, had 11 points in that game. Probably her 4th or 5th double-digit scoring game in that one. I feel like when you're going against a juggernaut like UConn, you have to win by committee. So it's going to take more than just the Maya Crumps and Adriana Avents and all the star players that we know to have big games. You're going to have some sneaky players that may not be on UConn scouting report to have some big games. And I feel like Haley Breland is somebody that could potentially get hot from 3. And who knows, maybe, Jackson State knocks on that door and probably walks in, maybe breaks the door down. Who knows, but, let's look big picture, Emily, and say, what is the final score prediction and who moves on to the round of 32? And what would you say is the biggest factor in the team that wins this game?
Yeah, I think, like I said before, I think it is going to come down to talent. I think in these early games, it does that a lot if they're close. You see, especially on the women's side, it's those elite level players, especially the volume of them that UConn has. Paige Beckers, Aaliyah Edwards, and Nika Mule all got All-American honors from the AP. That's 3 starters. You've got 2 former McDonald's All-American starters and your 2 freshmen. You've got a McDonald's All-American coming off the bench. So they just are so skilled in so many different areas. So I think that's the hardest thing for Jackson State to overcome for me, is just that raw talent level. I do think UConn comes out of this. I hate it for Jackson State. I hate that this is their matchup. Like I said earlier, I think they should have been a 12 or a 13 at lowest. But yeah, it would not surprise me at all to see them really put up a fight, at least through a half or a quarter. And UConn has not, they are not a stranger to a slow first quarter, a slow first half. So that would not shock me at all to see them really push them early. But I think it is going to end up being a situation where, Beckers and Edwards will kind of see the writing on the wall and take over when they need to. I'll give it a final of like 80. We'll give it like an 82 to 60. I think that feels right.
Yeah, that'll be a pretty fair final score. I think what you said with about the talent, and on the women's side, you see that much more than you see on the men's bracket. You look at the top seeds in the women's tournament. You got Iowa, who has, we don't even need to say her name. We know who she is. Caitlin Clark, for those who don't know, who lived under a rock. LSU, they got Angel Reese. South Carolina, you got Cardozo. You got all the big stars. It's hard to overcome that. When the thing that makes the men's bracket, why the NCAA tournament is so many people look forward to, is because you have that history of mid-majors having these upset wins. You had Norfolk State, beating Missouri back in 2012. You had Lehigh beating Duke back in, I believe, 2012 or 2013. You have all of these history of upsets. St. Peter's making it up to, I believe, the Sweet 16 or the Elite Eight. You had Florida Gulf Coast. You have George Mason in 2006. I think this is a chance for Jackson State to make a statement in a women's bracket that honestly does not have many upsets. It has had upsets, but there's not many. The cream rises to the crop a lot of times on the women's bracket. So this is a chance for Jackson State to make that statement and to put themselves on the map and get themselves into the round of 32. That being said, being realistic, I have to say that Paige Beckers and Aaliyah Edwards being announced being in this game, it was really a game changer, and it really hurt for Jackson State. I probably still would have leaned towards UConn, even if Aaliyah Edwards wasn't in, but I probably think it'll probably be a single digit margin or maybe a 10-point margin. But with Aaliyah Edwards, I have to go along with what you said. I probably say it's about a 85 to 60 margin. But I hope that it's a good game, and I hope that Jackson State continues to build. But it's a rough year this year for Jackson State. You talk about this being a tough draw. I believe their top 6 scorers are all seniors. So a lot of these players are this is going to be their last tournament experience. But just real quick, last question about UConn. What do you think is their ceiling? What is the best possible finish that they can have this year, realistically, that you see them having? It should they beat Jackson State, of course.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's hard to say that. I think for UConn, the ceiling is always a national title. I think that's just by nature of the program, by nature of the talent that they have, that's always going to sort of be, I think, that's always going to be a possibility. I don't think there's ever going to be a year, at least not while Gino is the head coach, where, we as a women's basketball media say, UConn has no chance of making the championship. I don't think anyone out there would say that. So I think realistically, they can certainly make the Final Four. I don't think that that's impossible. I don't even think it's, necessarily like improbable. I think they have probably a, 60-40 chance on the 40 side of making it. I think the biggest challenge in their bracket is USC by a lot. I don't see them losing to Ohio State for a second year in a row if they run into them in the Sweet 16. So I see an Elite 8 run for them, I think, is sort of about where I'm predicting right now. It wouldn't surprise me at all to see them make a Final Four. It wouldn't surprise me to see them make the title game. If they win it all, I will be surprised. But I think, anything is possible with UConn, especially with Paige playing again. She dragged them to the title game 2 years ago on a half of a working knee. So, I would not put anything past her and past Gino with the history that they have.
Awesome. But I know I said final question, but I gotta fit a question in about Tamika Reed. We don't sing her praises enough. We talked about this on a show that we did previously. She has an 83-4 SWAC conference record in the past 5 seasons. Just what if anything have you heard about her name in across the country in terms of the top coaches among mid majors and her potential to be potentially courted by other big programs and potentially even a team in the Big East maybe that could potentially want her services? Just talk about what you have heard about Tamika Reed and her impact on this team.
Yeah, I think Tamika's awesome. I mean, what she's built there in a very short amount of time is just so impressive. And I think what impresses me about her is just, again, like, I think she understands what it takes to establish a program on the national level, which is a really tall task at an HBCU. It's not, something that a lot of those schools and those athletic departments are financially and just sort of support wise equipped to put together. So yeah, I think the way that she's advocated for that team, the way that, I mean, she has translated it into success so quickly. She's recruited well. You know, I know I used to cover South Carolina before I was at UConn, and I know, Dawn Staley is a big fan of her. I think she's one of sort of the rising stars in the game, which is about as high an endorsement as you can get right about now. So yeah, I mean, I just think she's done a phenomenal job, and it's, again, I mean, them going undefeated in the SWAC, again, I voted for them in the AP. I thought they deserved to be there with the non-conference schedule that they had at the end of the year. I think she's just done a really phenomenal job, and it would not surprise me at all if she is on the move this offseason, especially with 6 seniors going. That is a very interesting wrinkle to her potential future.
Yeah, and Don Staley, who famously said that she would have voted Jackson State in the AP Top 25 if she had a vote. But thank you so much, Emily, for your time. I really appreciate it. For everyone who may not know, Jackson State and UConn will be playing on Saturday at 1 p.m. It will be broadcast live on ABC, so please tune in if you have a chance. So, Emily, if you can, let the people know where they can follow you and all your social media platforms. And just want to put this up here. It's the Hartford Courant. She writes for the Hartford Courant and covers UConn. So, Emily, just let everyone know where they can find you.
Yeah, totally. I'll be on site up here in stores at Gamble for all the games on Saturday. So yeah, you can follow me at EA Adams 6 on Twitter. That's where most of my updates go. Also, yeah, on current.com. You can read all of my stuff there. So yeah.
All right, great. So thank you everyone for tuning in. If you can, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. If you can, please follow us at HBCU Sports on Twitter. Follow us at Real HBCU Sports on Facebook. And please visit hbcusports.com for all the latest news in HBCU sports. Until next time, see you guys.